Welcome back to the program. But first, let's bring you some of our stories in brief. We begin with the House of Representatives. They've mandated the committees on steel and works to conduct investigation into the collapse of the Delta Steel Company and make recommendations on measures to ensure its resuscitation within the shortest possible time. The decision followed a motion raised by Honorable Ben Igbakwa, who informed lawmakers that the company was built on 172 hectares of land at the cost of $1.89 billion and was established to be the flagship of the steel industry in West Africa and also to provide jobs for thousands of Nigerians. Elsewhere, members of the Civil Society Situation Room are asking the National Assembly to prioritize the passage of bills proposing electoral reforms over those targeting the prohibition of hate speech. Speaking at a joint meeting with INEC to review the just concluded Kogi and Bayelsa States governorship elections in Abuja, the convener of the Civil Society Situation Room insists that there is urgent need for these reforms in order to curtail the excesses of politicians during future elections. Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, is attending Nigeria's annual education conference put together by the Association Development of Education in Africa, ADEA, with the theme Education for Sustainable Livelihoods, a system approach to strengthening the sector for productivity and global competitiveness. The lead paper at the conference is to be presented by Professor Margarete Mihoso O'Connor of the ADEA, the Minister of State for Education, Emeka Nwajuba, in his opening address, said by 31 December 2019, any teacher without a National Certificate in Education, that's NCE, would not be allowed in any classroom, stressing the need for continuous registration of qualified teachers in the country. And Nigeria has not reached any agreement with neighboring countries to facilitate the reopening of the land borders, according to the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, and the Minister of Information, Mr. Lai Mohammed. Even when the border closure is temporary and has caused food inflation, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. They stated this while addressing State House correspondents at the end of the weekly Federal Executive Council meeting in Abuja.
What's happening over the years is that our neighbors would transload the container, put about 5 containers on one truck, and drive it to the border, and as if it's only one container that they are going to pay duties on. We have asked our neighbors, please let's all respect the protocol on transit. If they do that, the borders will be opened. But you cannot continue to play the big brother at the expense of our national security, at the expense of our national economy.
And a bill for an act to ensure that 40% of the nation's annual budget is earmarked for capital projects in the next 10 years has scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. The bill, which is sponsored by the Speaker, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, seeks to pay more attention to infrastructure development. According to the Speaker, the bill is expected to stimulate the economy, increase the nation's gross domestic product. Let's get more perspective on the matter. We're now being joined by Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, fiscal policy and partner and West Africa tax leader as well with PricewaterhouseCoopers. We'd like to thank you for joining us via Skype on the program. Are you excited about this bill?
No, I'm not excited. I think first we have to query what is the whole essence of the bill. We do know that for any country to develop, you need infrastructure along with human capital and strong institutions. Some estimates have it that Nigeria needs to spend somewhere about $100 billion a year to be able to take our infrastructure to where it needs to be. And we are not spending nearly enough. But the challenge for me is not to state the percentage of the budget that has to be allocated for capital expenditure. The major problem is releasing funds to be able to complete and execute those projects. If we look at the federal government budget for the past 2 years, we've had ratios of between 30 and 23% earmarked for capital expenditure, but actual implementation had been a lot less. In fact, this is worse at the state level. for 2019, they have about 55% of their budget earmarked for capital expenditure, but at the end of the day, the actual implementation is often less than even 10%. So what I think that the National Assembly should do is to earmark revenue rather than just a percentage of budget. For example, we could say that a certain percentage of our oil revenue must go into capital infrastructure, which means that way we ensure that there's release of funds. Beyond that, we have to ensure there's efficiency and timely completion of those projects. In addition to that, the National Assembly has to be able to approve budget for a long period. Capital development is not something you do in 2 months or 3 months. The whole idea of going to the National Assembly every year to debate the budget for capital expenditure is inefficient and ineffective. Let's have a plan of capital development that is approved by the National Assembly for 5 years or even longer. And then what you take to them every year is if you have variations. In addition to that, for viable capital projects, we need to involve the private sector. Whether you're talking about rail, whether you're talking about ports, whether you're talking about electricity, so that government would only focus its limited resources on capital infrastructure that are in principle to do with social services for the people.
All right. We also know that this particular clause in the bill says that non-compliance with this provision will be a criminal offense. Do you think that's an extreme clause? I mean, you don't agree with it in the first place.
Yeah, I don't think you can implement it. How do you enforce it? So if you ask me to allocate 40% of my budget, but there's no money, so how do I then implement if there's no money? So the more fundamental problem is how do you make funds available for capital projects, not just allocating a percentage of the budget to it. If it's impossible to implement 40% because the money is not there, you cannot have any penalties to be able to enforce it.
All right. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Taiwo Yedele, Fiscal Policy Partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
And some more political stories. The Edo State chapter of the All Progressives Congress is calling on its members to ignore the caucus meeting being summoned by the leadership of the party in the nation's capital, Abuja. In a statement, the party chairman in Edo State, Mr. Anselm Ojezuwa, claims that the meeting was called without due consultation of all the leaders of the party in the zone. The statement adds that it has been learned that the purpose of this meeting is to procure and pass a vote of confidence on the embattled national chairman, Mr. Adams Oshiomhole, among other sinister motives. This is in spite of the series of no confidence votes earlier passed by all the relevant organs of the party in his home state where it matters the most. Mr. Ojezuwa called for the convening of a proper meeting of the caucus members in the South-South region after due consultation with the leaders of the party in the zone. But in the meantime, one of the conveners of the South-South Zonal Caucus meeting and vice chairman of the APC for the South-South Zone, Mr. Hilad Etta, dismissed Mr. Ojezuwa's call, stating that the Edo State is not the only flashpoint or agenda for the meeting. He explains that issues in Rivers and the elections in Bayelsa State are also to be considered, insisting that the Edo State chapter of the party cannot compel party members not to attend a meeting considered as legitimate. Well, that's all that's happening at this time, but feel free to let us know what you think about some of these issues on Lunchtime Politics and our various social media handles. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Nwaka.